Welcome to the IAP2 Australasia webinar, which provides an overview of 2017 IAP2 US Conference held in Denver.
Hello, my name is Rachael Edginton. I'm an IAP2 trainer, and in September last year I was very lucky to be the winner of a scholarship to go to the IAP2 US Conference held in the very vibrant city of Denver, USA in Colorado. I was fortunate to be there with my colleagues Liz Pope, Kate Vallence and Vivian Twyford, who are also going to be presenting their learnings on the webinar today. So Colorado has been on my bucket list for some time. It is known for world-class skiing, rugged cowboys, and the magnificent Rocky Mountains. Of course, the main attraction in Denver for Liz, Kate, Vivian and I was the IAP2 US Conference. The theme of the conference was Pursuing the Greater Good, Public Participation for a Changing World. And this was something that really interested me because I have a personal interest in community engagement and its role in creating positive legacy for communities. The conference aimed to answer some hard questions, such as what is the future of the practice, what are the changes we're seeing in the world today, what role does community engagement play in the world today, and does it have any place at all? Well, yes, of course it does. In this presentation, Liz, Kate, Vivian and I will share with you our learnings, our experience and what we took away from the conference. I'll present first and then I'll be followed by Liz, Kate and finally Vivian. So, just getting, I've never done a webinar before, so here I am. So bear with me, I'm never ever been a very good person when it comes to technicalities. So here we go. Let's see if I can actually get my slide presentation to go the right way. There we go. Excellent. So the community engagement was like, the conference was like a cathartic community engagement retreat for me, where I was able to vent and cry and release. I was able to share passions and successes. I made new friends. I even ate some local delicacies. I became a big fan of chili dogs. I even sung like no one was watching on public transport, but that's a whole other story. We watched a baseball game and one of us even went home with the ball. But most of all, I had the most wonderful one-day road trip in the Rockies. And my photo there on the right is me on top of the world at the Rockies, feeling quite free, quite cathartic, very happy, very excited about what I was about to experience. But what happens in Colorado obviously stays in Colorado, apart from the learnings that I'm about to share with you. So for me, one of the really interesting things about this particular conference was that as an IAP2 trainer and a scholarship winner, I was actually able to attend 2 days, one before the conference and one after the conference, to help design and discuss and brainstorm the future of IAP2. So the picture you see on this slide is a whole lot of fabulous practitioners from around the world actually brainstorming the future of IAP2, which was a really wonderful thing to be a part of. I learned that the IAP2 was founded by a small, passionate group of practitioners in 1990, and it used to be called the IAP3. But they dropped one of the words. It used to be the International Association of Public Participation Practitioners, but they dropped the word practitioners after a while because it was more about the practice and improving the practice rather than about the practitioners themselves. And it was born from a growing demand by the public to be more involved in decisions that impacted them. In 27 years, we've grown to nearly 10,000 members worldwide. And I must say that the future of the IAP2 is in really good hands. In fact, I like to think that we're heading for global domination, for the greater good, of course. Today, I'd like to talk to you about some learnings that I took away from Denver. There were 3 particular sessions that impressed me, and it was all around crisis and conflict. So as a community engagement practitioner, I've dealt a lot with crisis and conflict and massive controversial issues, as many of us do, because when you bring community together to talk about an issue, there's always differing views, and sometimes there's very emotionally different views. So what I want to talk about today is 3 sessions. One was Managing Polarization by Eric Bergman. The other is by Doug Sano and Christy Parker-Selico. They talked about a case study, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that case study because it was impressive. It was about bringing community engagement to a crisis and being able to use community engagement techniques in a crisis. And the last but not least is engagement therapy by Dave Biggs. I actually named my whole session today after Dave Biggs and his engagement therapy because it was a really worthwhile session for me. So to begin with, Eric Bergman. So Eric Bergman actually has developed a model on polarization. So this is what we saw about his session before we entered it. And when we got in there, he shared with us his polarization model. So according to Eric Bergman, polarization, and the dictionary by the way, polarization occurs because of unresolved problems that escalate into a dispute. The idea of this particular model is that community responses can be tracked according to this particular model. So from openly hostile on the left to openly supportive on the right. And the further you go to the outer edges, the more you may move away from logical argument and logical responses into very emotional responses and very emotional arguments. The issue is, the more you go to the outer edges, usually what you find is that this results in a tug-of-war as they argue their side and try to convince the others to change. The ultimate aim with this model is to move people from openly hostile to a more neutral place by presenting them with logical information. Once you have moved them from openly hostile to a more logical space, it then becomes easier to bring them over into a logical supportive space. And maybe, eventually, into openly supportive, but I think that's asking a lot. I think getting them to quiet logical thought and questioning is a really good start. So, how did Eric Bergman say that this can be done? What I'm going to do is just pick out a couple of his key tips. So, a couple of Eric's key tips in managing polarization were the following. 1, the organisation has to have a position that's reasonable, ethical, rational, and therefore defensible. You need to make sure you have practiced and prepared for all possible questions, and that you do have a logical defensive narrative, that you're able to defend your narrative, but in a logical way that's ethical and is able to put out good, succinct, accurate information so that people can make judgment calls. Secondly, the organisation has to be prepared to answer those questions. It has to be more courageous and ready to embrace a new level of transparency. And a lot of organisations find that quite difficult. Bergman said true transparency can come with a 3-word question. If an organisation can go out there and say to its community, ask me anything. Now, a lot of organisations would find that quite scary. But his reasoning is that if you can ask me anything and I can answer in a succinct and logical way, then I will have a more chance as an organisation to give you information that gives you a true story of what's happening, a true narrative. And then you'll be able to get people away from openly hostile and hopefully being in a place where they can consider a more logical argument. He also suggested the technique of PAS. I think he might have pronounced it pause, but it's an acronym for P, and it's PAS. And P stands for pause. So it's an answering technique. So if you're in a community engagement activity and you've got quite a few people asking you questions, his technique is to use the PAS system for answering those questions. So P is pause. Pause when you've been asked a question. Make sure you've listened to the question. And then find the right answer. A is obviously answer the question. But don't just answer any old question, and don't ramble and don't waffle off. Answer the question succinctly. Answer the question that's been asked. And S stands for stop. Don't go on and on and on. Don't be an oxygen thief. Answer the question that's been asked and then stop. Give your audience some time to process and wait for the next question. And when the questions run dry, then you know you've done a pretty good job of being able to give and present a logical argument if they've been able to ask as many questions as they can. And the old rule also stands: if you can't answer a question, tell them you're not sure about that. You'll look into it and give them a time and a place where you will follow up on that answer. So that's Eric Bergman and polarisation and some tips I took away. The next slide I'd like to share is Doug Sarno and Christy Parker-Salico. So they had a really interesting case study which I'll breeze through, but it was titled "Our Community Could Blow Up." The crisis: millions of pounds of illegally disposed explosives on the perimeter of a sleepy little town in Louisiana. One small explosion had occurred in the middle of the night, but lucky nobody was injured. And the townsfolk are living with the uncertainty of a possible evacuation at any time and maybe even the loss of their homes. And the whole thing could blow up at any time. Millions of pounds of illegally disposed explosives. Quite a volatile event that they had to manage. This used to be an explosive storage bunker. So this is the middle of the night. This is what blew up. This is what happened. The dilemma. So there's a handful of government departments involved in the disposal of these particular explosives, but nobody was taking the lead or taking responsibility. Consultants Doug and Kirsty were trying to drive an outcome with a number of stakeholders, but they were herding like cats. Everyone was running from responsibility, and no one really knew what to do because at any moment the whole town could blow. The explosive contractors were facing bankruptcy and jail time, and in fact, in the end, 6 of the employees did go to jail for storing explosives unsafely and obstructing inspection when the time came round to have it inspected. Government agencies announced that they would do an open burn, but the community had no consultation on this decision, and they were very frustrated and they weren't supportive because of environmental and health concerns. So basically, they were spiralling into conflict, disruption and delay. And the whole thing could blow at any time. So the community decides to rally. And it rallies with 8,500 people on its Facebook. It rallies with 75 national groups getting behind them and actually writing a letter to the EPA in America. And in protest, an army colonel decides to lay down in front of one of the bulldozers. So it's getting quite a lot of exposure, and the community is actually becoming quite powerful. So what did Doug and Kirsty do? Christy, sorry, not Kirsty. Well, they engaged intensively with the community. They supported them to research into their own disposable technology options rather than an open burn, and to hear from advisors that they trusted, and to source advisors that they trusted as well, and to choose their own disposal method. They used person-to-person meetings, conference calls, endless phone conversations, web-based interaction, but a lot of face-to-face. They put their government agencies on the spot, behind closed doors, and they prepared them with a lot of really difficult questions about what the community might ask them. So they really had to make sure that they were covered for all the questions that they could possibly be answered, and they needed to be transparent and open. They gathered a landslide of information about all the different kinds of ways to dispose of these particular kinds of explosives. And they kept connecting the stakeholders. They kept driving momentum and facilitating conversations until there was a consensus. And they achieved community consensus on a contained burn technology and agreed actions within 45 days. The moral of the story is that there's always time to engage a community for a better outcome, even if that community is about to blow. And I think we've all been in situations where there's been major crisis. Okay, the community may not be about to blow up, but metaphorically speaking, we've all been in those situations. And we tend to go into crisis communication rather than looking at engaging effectively, intensively to come out with a better option. An interesting case study. Next, I'd like to talk to you about engagement therapy with Dave Biggs. This is last but not least, but a really, really good session, I felt. The most valuable session for me, because I was really able to release my past community engagement traumas during this particular session, and it helped me to realise that it's okay not to be a perfect community engagement practitioner. I learnt that we all have experiences and engagement that could have gone better. We all have a story. We all have regrets. And there's a lot of things that I've done. There's projects I've been involved in that haven't gone as well as I would have expected. And it leaves you with a feeling of, could I have done better? Did I fail? What did I do wrong? And I think what we've got to realise is that, we're put in a situation where we are managing some very difficult, controversial projects, and we tend to take it on a lot as practitioners because we care so much. As an engagement practitioner, we're looked upon as having the magic wand, the methodology, and therefore the answers. We are often directed to manage challenging issues and problems, and therefore we can become the owners of unsuccessful outcomes as well. There are so many different variables when you're looking at good engagement, and many of these are not in our control. We need to be kinder to ourselves and understand the nuggets of gold that we take away from every outcome, whether award-winning or disappointing. So, after we spent some time really looking through our deep, dark secrets and spending some time forgiving ourselves for the things that went wrong, Dave then invited us to talk about our lessons learned and to have some input into a paper that he's writing as a result of this particular session. This is one of my suggestions at the time. We were to come up with a top 3. I think I came up with a little bit more than that, but I tried to narrow it down to my top 3. One of my suggestions was about getting to loud voices early and about really understanding issues early and maybe looking at ways in which we can co-design and maybe have some shared leadership as well with those particular loud voices if it was appropriate and if they wanted to be on board. And as a result, Dave Biggs has actually published a paper, and it was recently released, and it's called Facing Contention, 21 Tips to Detox Public Engagement. And I've downloaded it, and I'm going to let you know where you can download it, but I found it to be quite useful. In a nutshell, these are the key themes that he's come up with, and these themes actually have a lot of information and steps beneath them as well. But these are the key themes that he's come up with. Firstly, gain clarity on issues early. Focus engagement on community priorities. Create a safe place in person and online for people to engage with you. Engage the masses online. Weave in education where you can. And design for actionable results. So being able to come out and have some outcomes that are able to be achieved and outcomes also that are pretty much demonstrative of the common voice that was in the room, if possible. So below there, I have the download link. You can download Dave's full document by visiting that link below. I'll give you a moment to have a look at it and copy it down. But I think also if you search his company MetroQuest and you have a look at the e-books that he's written on there, you'll come across this one as well. So overall, there's a last one there that I didn't share. Share outcomes with compassion. Actually, on that note too, I did go to one more session, and I'll just give it a little plug because it was quite good. It was actually called If Not, Why Not? And it was about closing the loop. And it falls in nicely with this last particular point, share outcomes with compassion. Because if not, why not, is about if you're not going to take on a community's suggestions or a person's suggestions, then why not? Where's the context? How are you going to get back and close the loop? Because that builds trust, it builds relationships, and if you can give them some reasonable context, they may accept your outcome. So I thought that was just an interesting mention as well. I've actually started to pick up the phrase, if not, why not, quite a bit, especially when I've been doing IAP2 training and we talk about closing the loop. I've been using that term quite a bit. And last but not least, thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you to my colleagues for giving me such a wonderful experience over in Denver. Thank you to the IAP2 for the excellent opportunity to be able to put forward for that scholarship. For me, it was an incredibly emotionally validating, wonderful journey, and there are a lot of good Australians over there. There were many of us that travelled together and many Australians at the US Denver Conference, which was fantastic to see us so well represented. And I've got to say, I think that the Australasian region is a very sophisticated, very passionate region, and it was great to blend ideas and thoughts and learnings with our global colleagues. So that's the end of my ramble. So what I'll do now is I'd like to pass over to my colleague Liz Pope. Liz, if you'd like to share your nuggets, over to you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rachel. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed that presentation. Hopefully mine will follow up nicely. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Pope. I am from sunny Perth, Western Australia, just over on the west. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on the panel today. I'm really excited to share with you some of my insights and experiences and impressions from the IAP2 conference in Denver. I work as a community and stakeholder engagement consultant at TPG Placematch, and I've been fairly new to the industry. By the time that Denver rolled around, I was only in my role for about 12 months, so relatively new. And so that was kind of where I was coming from. Super, super excited, just thrilled to be able to attend such a prestigious conference overseas. And basically it was the first time that I got to meet practitioners outside of the WA chapter at that stage. So again, to meet so many people from internationally, from the US and Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, Indonesia, that was fantastic. And I guess when I was about to launch off into this great adventure, I was a bit apprehensive about the fact that, you know, what did I know at that stage in my career? You know, what did I know already? How much do I know? And essentially what might I can contribute to the conversation? But as it turns out, not a lot at the time. So full disclosure, I actually got a little bit sick on the plane over, and I lost my voice completely by about the second or third day of the conference. So I relied on my, you know, my faux sign language quite a lot, and my lovely interpreters, my fellow Australians, to help me out with that. But it really did take my listening skills to a whole new level. And quite, you know, reflecting back on that, trying to find a little bit of a silver lining in that whole experience in a communications and networking conference, I was thinking, you know, a lot of the time I was listening and I had something really that I wanted to contribute, but I just wasn't physically able to do so. And it made me think maybe this is sometimes how our communities feel when there's a decision making being talked about, or everyone's just chatting around. And it just made me think, oh gosh, like, you know, something to consider going forward with all that. But yeah, so we'll just get straight in. So sorry, wait a minute, I lost my place in the buttons. There we go, sorry. So again, I'd just like to say the Denver experience was fantastic. Obviously, I got to meet some great people from overseas, you know, and explored the town of Denver, of the city of Denver, to say, you know, walking tours, to seeing all the history, seeing the wildlife, that little deer there that, you know, all the Australian girls got to see for the first time, and we were just like over the moon excited. We also got to do a lot of social events. So we had the ball, the core value awards, and we got to do that's me with my craft and cocktails night, which is very fun as well. But also, as Rachel mentioned, we were privileged enough to attend the bookend Denver conversations, just really exploring where the organisation internationally and to an extent regionally was going to go forward. So that was a fantastic, you know, sweetener for that trip as well. So today what I wanted to talk about, I was reflecting back on what were some of the key presentations that I witnessed in the delegations and so forth that I wanted to talk about. And the one I kept coming back to was one from a lovely lady called Gemma Putty that's based in Utah, called Breaking Down Walls, Creating a United Self-Front Through Self-Reflection. And so what Gemma's presentation really explored with the group about how do we as practitioners reflect upon ourselves and our self-truths, and what do we bring into a room every time we engage. So this was about what energy do we bring to a room, and is it essentially a negative or a positive kind of feelings, depending on what the context, what, you know, the decision and what we're all discussing, and how we're going to therefore take our communities through those activities and that process and those eventual decisions that are made at the very end of the process. And it's all linked back to what Gemma was describing as what change do we want to see in the world, and what kind of change do we want to bring about essentially in these conversations with our communities. And it really kind of got me thinking about, you know, for me personally, coming from a very, you know, my past life as a environmental scientist and working in those kind of sectors, I'm very, very much about, you know, getting rid of variables, and I'm thinking, you know, we need to be totally unbiased when we come into these sessions, you know, to make sure, and a lot of the time our clients might say, you know, we are the people that need to be unbiased because we're coming in and we're essentially not there, you know, leaning one way or the other. But we also have to realize that at some extent we're not 100% unbiased because we're people and people are complicated, but just taking the time to step back and figure out what makes us tick and how do we perceive ourselves and others might really enrich the experience of what we're doing with our communities and our stakeholders. And being quite early on in my engagement career, you know, at that stage of 12 months, I was reflecting back, thinking, what have I done this past year and what kind of practitioner do I want to be? So I think that attending this particular presentation was very timely for me personally. And it's basically, you know, just being you and being genuine in those kinds of, you know, activities is really quite important. So this is kind of the background thinking. This is an image that Gemma put up. So it's just basically looking at where do our labels come from, where, you know, they're influenced by our origins, by our past experiences, what we take in over a lifetime and things like the media and people around us. And so our self-truths are things, you know, our labels that we put on ourselves might be things like, you know, I'm a mother, or I'm a friend, or I'm shy, those kinds of things. And our self-truths can then be things like, well, I'm a professional person and I want to make sure that I come into a room fully prepared. Sorry, that was the action. My apologies. But yeah, so things that I wrote down for me personally, because we took through this activity, were things like friend, professional, homebody, unsure, creative, and curious. And then from there, the things that I came up with for self-truth and actions and so forth were things such as reducing conflict, being a conduit for perspectives, and finding stories that spark joy. So at the end of that exercise, I actually thought, oh, maybe I'm in the right profession these days. And so taking that sentiment of what you realize about yourself, then you can say that, you know, does this energy that I bring in hinder or help the final outcome? And it really all just depends on the process. So as an example, at the moment, I'm actually doing getting ready for a project that deals with teenagers and preteens, and we're just exploring about, you know, asking the question, what do you want to see in a potential new youth centre? And at the beginning of this process, I was actually quite apprehensive because I was like, oh my gosh, I've never worked with teenagers. I haven't really talked to many teenagers since I was one. But all the information and all the advice I've been getting is, you know, you need to be genuine. And I feel like this is a very good exercise. It's a good pulse check to actually understand, you know, perhaps have a bit of a consideration about the, you know, groups of communities and stakeholders that you might not have actually interacted with before. And I also think that it might be a good exercise to help probably do like stakeholder analysis right in the beginning, or at least understand our assumptions about new stakeholders that we haven't come across before. But at the end of the day, this is just about realizing that people are not one-dimensional. People care about many things, and taking a step back and seeing what you care about, and then also thinking about what other people might care about. That's really a good conduit to starting really good, genuine conversation and meaningful professional relationships. So that's just one of the presentations that I saw and I thought was really fabulous, and I'm still pondering kind of the intricacies of that, you know, still all these months later. So the other thing So the other thing I wanted to share with you is basically one of the running things that I found when I was there was what came up quite a bit was talking about our young members or our new members, I should say, because looking around the room, there's people there that, you know, not possibly my age, but also it's a bit of a gauge about, you know, who is new to this profession, because it's not necessarily, you know, a young person coming in. So the people I was talking to, it was a lot like me, so they kind of fell into it, or they were changing sectors completely to come into being an engagement professional because it was something that they thought that was great to be into, and they wanted to develop those skills. And so that became a bit of a running thing, just talking to people, and also when we were doing the Denver discussions. And it's basically just talking about, I just wanted to highlight, you know, we were brainstorming a few things about how to engage the new members and in a bit of a subset, quite young members, because, you know, I'm personally not aware about a graduate community engagement professional coming in to businesses. It's more about you fall into that kind of process itself that might be tagged onto your regular job. So these are just a couple of pictures that just highlight it. So on the left there we have, that was a bit of a running infographic that was being created throughout the conference, and we have things like people under 40 playing a more influential role. That was something that was talked about, you know, do we have more young professional representation happening, and what do you know, quite younger members want out of their professional memberships and so forth, and what skills do they need to have going forward. And this is a photo I took of the last day of the conference, of the Denver discussions, I should say. I wrote down, this is kind of the brainstorm about what's the next steps, and my have trust in your young members to step up, because that was just something that I thought was, you know, something very topical at the time after all those days. And also, this is just a few more things that popped up. So things like having a monthly podcast about what's happening. So really looking at ways to more connect with members on a regular level, and maybe just target more of a young or newer member base. Having a dedicated young engagement network was an idea that came up. So you know, you see it with things like the planning industry or the water industry, the industries that I've been aware of. And they've been quite good to really connect and kind of open up, you know, the broader, what can you do in this space, in this career. Soft skills training beyond the certificate itself, I thought, you know, basically like facilitation skills, practicing more and more, not, you know, there is the practical elements of the certificate, which is fantastic, but I thought more of a practice test run, you know, with your peers essentially, and you can get that feedback. Tailored social networking, young membership discount was something that was thrown around. You know, people really just starting out and maybe not, you know, kind of force that membership right at the offset. And a young member board seat on the board, which is something I really liked. Things like a Bright Spark Award was also talked about. So the young, new people coming in, what's like a fantastic thing that they've done just on the offset. So these are just some of the things, and I think I'm aware that IAP2 Australasia management have heard a lot of these ideas, and I think that, you know, it's a bit of a watch this space situation, which I'm really excited about to see where it lands. And yeah, so that's just something that was a bit of a thing that I heard about throughout our time in Denver. And basically the last thing I wanted to talk about before I wrap up is, you know, the best feel-good story that I saw when I was there. It's always lovely to end a conference on those kinds of stories. So I wanted to talk briefly about the Dahlia campus for Health and Wellbeing. It was a field trip that we did on our last day of the conference. So the Dahlia campus actually won the 2017 Core Value Award. It actually was an international project award winner. So just as a bit of a background, so we were given a lovely presentation and tour by the director, Lydia Prada. So she's a mental health professional and the head of the Dahlia campus, and she really wanted to take integrated care to the next level. So this is based in Denver, one of the poorest neighborhoods, and they were having issues with mental health, and so they wanted to basically put a center into the area. And what actually came out were these very deep discussions with the community about what do you want on here. And what turned out a running theme was people just wanted to talk about food and the fact that they couldn't have access to good, healthy, clean food, basically fresh stuff. It was classed as a food desert. And so what eventually came out, it wasn't just a mental health centre, it was really listening to people's concerns. This is a community that has been let down before. And so the appreciative inquiry technique was used quite substantially. And they realised very early on, and by the way, these weren't IAP2 practitioners. These were just people that, knowing that it was the right thing to do, to talk to people early, to talk to people genuinely, and to really listen to what they need. So food was a massive theme, as I said before. They have this beautiful, massive garden. They have a fantastic aquaponics setup, which I'm really excited about because I have one at home. And they also wanted to tackle things like childhood dentistry. A lot of the children there have real dental problems. And of course there was the mental health centre. A lot of programs from all the time with teenagers, older folk, really young kids. They have the little preschool there that deals with a bit more of the integrated special needs children as well. But I was just really inspired by the fact that it was a need to fill, and they filled it, and they did it fantastically well with the community themselves, and actually really listened to what they needed. So that was me wrapping up for today. I just wanted to also say thank you so much to IAP2 Australasia and IAP2 International for having me at the Denver conference. It was a fantastic experience that I'll never forget. And I also wanted to say thank you so much to my fellow delegates for your friendship, for also looking after me at certain points of the trip. But it was just a fantastic experience, and I look forward to learning more. I look forward to hearing more and more from across our Australian and New Zealand chapters as well, to see what's on the horizon. So I'd love to hand off to my lovely colleague Kate Vallence, and thank you again for having me.
Today. So I'm located in Geelong, Victoria, and I'm the Community and Stakeholder Engagement Coordinator for Barwon Water. And Barwon Water is Victoria's largest regional urban water corporation, and we have a customer base of just over 298,000 customers, and we're quite a big area where we service just out of Melbourne, all the way down past Apollo Bay, and taking in some of those hinterlands and other outlying councils. So the title of my presentation today is "If it's not carefully crafted, it will fall apart." And that was a wording or quote that I took from my favourite conference presenter, Mahina Martin. So I'll get to Mahina shortly, but just to sort of start off, I'll tell a bit more of a story. I'll set the scene a bit more. So I had a real pinch myself moment when I saw the LinkedIn post from IAP2 Australasia promoting the opportunity to win a scholarship or a young member scholarship to attend the Denver conference and associated workshops either end of the conference. And so I got a bit excited, and I put together a bit of a submission telling a bit of a story about myself, and submitted it, and just cross my fingers, and you could have really knocked me over with a feather when Nunzio, the current IAP2 CEO at the time, rang me to let me know I had been lucky enough to win one of the young member scholarships. And excitement really turned into community engagement geek as I started going through the conference program, deciding who I wanted to listen to, the things that I wanted to do when I was there, and basically when I sort of saw that we were potentially going to be listening to people about resilience, inclusion, partnerships, and changing landscapes, I really couldn't wait to get to Denver fast enough. So basically I downloaded the iPhone countdown clock app and put in how many sleeps it was to get there. So very excited, and as you can see on my presentation, that's my super excited face. Okay, so basically arrived in Denver and went straight to the top, literally. Like Liz, like Rachel, like Vivian, I attended 2 pre- and post-conference workshops, and they were with board members of other IAP2 affiliates and the Federation. So the affiliate board members are, for example, Australasian board members, South African, Indonesian, USA and Canada, and there was also a bunch of trainers in the room from across the world as well, including Australasia as well. And really the purpose of those workshops was to talk about the future of IAP2 on a global scale, and that was great to be a part of and really listen to some of the wisdom in the room and also about what other countries are doing. But I'll let Vivian talk a bit more about that after me, but that was great to be a part of. And that little picture is me presenting to the group on some of our group work that we did about, you know, what that could look like. So that was super fun too. So went along to the pre and post workshops, and that was great. But of course, it's not all work and no play when you go to these things. And lucky enough to get some really big bucket list items ticked off, which included heading off to my first ever and probably my one and only baseball match in Denver, and that was the Colorado Rockies versus the San Francisco Giants. I didn't actually realize how long a baseball match goes for, so if you could imagine a test cricket match, maybe add on a few hours, and I thought cricket was long, but baseball's even longer. And I was the one that was lucky enough to take home a foul ball, so the ball just miraculously found its way up into the nosebleed section, and I was lucky enough to be still there and grab it. And then that other picture is of me on top of the world, basically. We were lucky enough on our last day to hire a car and head up over to the Rockies National Park with a few of the other Aussie girls that were still left, and yeah, had a great time, and was able to do some sightseeing as well. So I guess getting into it straight away, and I referenced Mahina Martin already. Mahina's presentation really involved around good outcomes, how to engage with Indigenous communities, how to engage with culturally sensitive communities. And Mahina is actually she's native Hawaiian, and she actually works for Maui Electric. So they're basically responsible for electricity across the various islands within the Hawaiian island base. And she also talked about differing values that stakeholders have and how this could potentially derail your project or your initiative or what it is that you're actually working on. And one of her big take-home points was understanding that stakeholder values and perspectives can make or break your outcome. And when we talk about outcomes, we sometimes talk about, what's a good outcome? And really, that depends on what your interpretation of good is. And as you can see by my picture here on my presentation, do outcomes matter? And the surgeon says, brilliant surgery, well done, shame the patient died. So was the good outcome the fact that the surgeon performed a good surgery, or was the good outcome that the patient survived? So I think that was a really good take-home point from Mahina in her presentation about really understanding and defining upfront, before perhaps you even start speaking to communities, about what is a successful outcome or what is a good outcome for your project. And that will really set the tone for how you engage and talk along the way. You know, when you go to define that, is your definition of good good for the community, good for the client, good for the project, or good for the boss? And I guess that's really questions that you need to ask yourself. And I think as well, we really need to pay respect to the fact that we live in societies which all have very unique perspectives and expectations, and determining what those outcomes are is actually part of the process in itself. So I really feel like I've started doing that as part of my engagement planning, is really, first and foremost going, well, what's a good outcome, and then actually getting into the nitty-gritty and the detail of the project shortly thereafter, because perhaps once you understand what is the outcome will actually help inform the way you get to the very end of your project. So that was a great insight from Mahina. Mahina also talked about the importance of being fluid and adaptable in your actual planning and undertaking of engagement processes. So things like checklists and textbooks and training manuals, they're all great and wonderful, and they really give you the tools and help and sort of, educational background for how to do this job. But they can also miss really obvious things. So Mahina really focused on not relying on these particular materials when you're starting to undertake an engagement project. And really, we should be starting with 3 really core things, which are history, culture, and values. And although Mahina's presentation really focused on engagement with cultural and Indigenous communities within Hawaii, I really feel like history, culture and values could be adapted to any community that we're working in. You think about it, a small outlying community in rural Queensland will have its own culture. There'll be people that you don't talk to in town, people that you do talk to in town. That's part of their culture. There'll be a history with that town. There'll be a similar project that happened 50 years ago and that failed, so your project's going to fail. And that community will also have a real strong sense of value, that it might be, well, we don't want to develop, or we want to bring more people here, or we want to look after our young people. So I really felt like those key points that Mahina talked about were really important when starting to plan for an engagement approach, whether it's with Indigenous communities or just communities in general, which is what I really took out of it. So we need to understand those 3 elements really well, and we also need to understand them, that it's not just a step-by-step checklist. Rather, engagement needs to be undertaken as a circular approach, not a linear approach. So not box 1, move on to box 2, move on to box 3. It's this circular approach of engaging with communities in a way that each interaction or each phase or each step actually feeds into the next step, and potentially you have to maybe go back a couple of steps to get something right before you keep moving, and so you start this circular process. And the idea of, a circle is that it is never ending, and that to me again was a great an affirmation from Mahina that engagement is never ending. Really, we should be going into communities all the time, or staying embedded in communities and continuing these conversations. It shouldn't just be a drop in and drop out type approach. So this idea of this circular approach to engagement planning, engagement doing, and just talking to people, I felt was really important. Oh no, sorry. Mahina also talked about I think there was 6 key elements that she really put onto the group participants in the room to say, always remember to do this when you're starting out planning for an engagement. And she said there was 6 things, and it started with values. So I've already talked about values, but I guess to reaffirm that, it's what does the community voice say it values? Don't ever guess it. Don't ever assume you know what it is. You might do some desktop research, or you might have your own perception on that, but you really need to ask that question. So I felt that was very important. The next one was recognise and combine. So acknowledge your own expertise, but also acknowledge the fact that the community members that you're working with are also experts. They're experts in their own lifestyles, their livelihood, their heritage. They may have lived somewhere for 50 years, so they're an expert about where they live as well. Not someone like you that perhaps might only have a high level knowledge of where they live. So I think it's good to explain what you're an expert in and also acknowledge what they're an expert in and perhaps how you two can better work together. I think it's also important that you ask those community experts what it is that they would like from us as the community engagement or the community development person. What would they like us to know about their community or about themselves to help this process be underway? And that really goes towards building trust and a relationship and really, I guess, getting your project off the ground and in the right direction. The next value that Mahina really talked about was this idea of falling out of the sky can really hurt. And it was a bit similar to what I just said before about not dropping in, so to speak, and parachuting in to save the day isn't always welcomed. Some of these communities that she spoke about in Hawaii really viewed community engagement people or developers who were trying to do what they thought was positive for the community as a really negative thing because they hadn't been asked about what they actually wanted. So I think as community engagement people, we need to really be mindful about the importance of not dropping in or not parachuting in, and we actually aren't there to save the day. We're actually there to generate good conversations, positive conversations about trying to enable a community to develop itself or to give them the skills to enhance their own development of their communities on whatever scale that might be. The fourth value that Mahina talked about was the importance of stories and that all stories have values. It's more about what is your story, not your sell. So don't ever, I guess Mahina talked about the importance of explaining, providing context, setting the scene, not sort of jumping straight to, a KPI or I have to get this outcome for my supervisor or my boss or something like that. She really focused in on that when she was talking about the Indigenous communities that she had worked with in her role, that stories were a way for those communities to learn and accept people because storytelling was a huge part of their Indigenous culture. But I feel like that, again, that could be adapted to any community that you're working in. I think it's important to tell communities about yourself so that they, once they get to know you, they can hopefully become to trust you and then open up and outcomes follow and good results follow or bad results or good results for them, as we talked about. And again, going back to this circular approach to conversations, are you going to be there in a circular way? Are you going to be there for the next transaction with this community? Are you going to be there to better their lives or better their community's outlook or what's going to happen in their community? So I really liked that idea about that stories have values and it's more about your story and not your sell. The fifth value that Mahina talked about was this idea around conversing and versus convincing. So obviously one tells people how much smarter you are and one learns through conversations. And I think it's important as a community engagement person that it's about conversing, it's about learning from conversations. It's about looking below the surface. What else is happening in this community? Why is it happening? Is that why they're conversing with me in this way? Is that why there are these perceived issues in this community? So I think it's really important to always keep that in mind about conversing versus convincing and really deciding which one you are. The next value that Mahina talked about was how things make you feel and that trust is earned and experienced. And this was one of my favourite bits of her advice or of her 6 values that she talked about, that think about feelings in a textural sense. If it rubs you the wrong way, if it's abrasive, if it rubs you the wrong way and it's abrasive, then imagine how that might feel to the community that you're working in or that you're talking to. You want to ask yourself, what are the types of things that, keep you warm, keep you comfortable, make you feel safe? What feeling do you want your communities to have? So it's almost like put yourself in their position and really then try and work backwards and tailor what you're trying to achieve with that sort of textural element involved, and really ask, how are they going to feel about it if I say this? It's almost like asking yourself the question before you ask them, but with them in mind. And so I really loved that piece that she talked about. So the next part of my presentation talks about my title, which, if it's not carefully crafted, it will fall apart. And at the end of Mahina's presentation in Denver, she shared this lovely story about a traditional Hawaiian headwear or headdress, which was called a lei hulu. Sorry if I haven't said that right. And basically, Mahina explained that it was a very intricate process in creating these headdresses, and that you have to be sort of specially trained by an elder in the community and have these special skills to actually do that, and she was one of those people who could do that. But she found that she had to make it for this massive event where she had to make hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these headdresses for people to wear. And just because of the sheer amount that she had to do, she just found herself rushing and trying to get them finished. And in her haste, she had realised that she had accidentally made them the wrong way, which meant that they were going to basically fall apart. And as soon as you put them on your head, it would just, all the feathers would come out and it would be a disaster and not work. But what Mahina talked about was that she learned from that experience that going one way may not work. So you have to be open to going another way or doing things differently. So, when she knew that she'd made this problem, she had to really think quickly, and with the help of her family and her community members, she was able to repair the remaining headwear, and basically the headwear was saved and the community event could happen, and they had a wonderful time. So I think what my slide is saying there is, if plan A doesn't work, the alphabet has 25 more letters to choose from. So if plan A doesn't work, try plan B, or try plan A.1 or plan D.2. It's just about thinking, if one way doesn't work, try and be another way, and try and be adaptable and as flexible as possible in your community engagement planning. And finally, Mahina talked about that to be effective, or for a community engagement program to be effective, it really must matter to you. So again, with her headwear story, they were so important to her, and she knew that whatever solution she had to come up had to be effective, and so when she did, it mattered, and then it worked. So I thought that was a lovely sentiment that she left us with. And so really I focused on Mahina's presentation because it was by far my favourite, and that really ends my my webinar on my experiences in Denver. But I'd finally just like to leave you all just with some parting words that basically, similar to my other colleagues, I'd love to thank the IAP2 Australasian board members and executive team for creating the Young Member Scholarship Award and providing such a wonderful lifetime opportunity to go to somewhere like Denver and to hear some of the wonderful speakers like Mahina and many others, and just to really understand what everyone else is doing in the world when it comes to community engagement. This final picture here in my slide caught my eye while I was actually wandering around Denver, and it really stuck with me. And I've actually since realised it's a line from a David Bowie song, so that's a that's a bit of a fun fact for you. But for me, I guess coming out of Denver and a really busy 2017, I'm really excited to keep learning and discovering more about community engagement, stakeholder engagement, participation, and I just feel like every day there seems to be new projects and new ways of connecting with people and discovering stories. And I'm really looking forward to a bright 2018 with lots of collaboration, new experiences to share with my fellow IAP2 members and other groups that I'm a member of, and just sort of finding out great and new ways to connect with communities and to affect change. So thank you for listening, and I hope you got something out of it. And yeah, if anyone's got any questions about Mahina's presentation that they would like to find out more about from me, or get a copy of it, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to talk more about that with you offline. Okay, thank you so much, and I'll hand over to Vivian now. So thank you.
Well, hello, and well done, Rachel and Liz and Kate, So, to introduce myself, I'm Vivian Twyford. I'm an ambassador for IAP2 Australasia and a life member of IAP2. I actually come from Wollongong, and as I've been sitting listening to the early part of this webinar, there has been a storm brewing around me, and thunder and lightning and now rain. So if you're hearing any kind of sound, background sound, this may be what it is. Maybe the thunder and lightning is all a preface to the presentation. Like the others, I was very surprised when I got a scholarship to attend the North American Conference, because it was not what I expected. They were looking for an ambassador who was able to go, and although it was, unlike the others, my 10th or 11th conference in 20 years of IAP2 membership, I was excited. I was excited perhaps mostly to meet up with long-standing colleagues and friends initially, but then also to offer useful views in some potentially difficult conversations that I thought might be happening, and, as always with conferences, to share and learn from new perspectives, because the world of public participation needs to transition all the time to transform itself to meet emerging social needs. So, where was I going? What did I take out of my 5 days in Denver 5 months later? IAP2 conferences have always been learning experiences, and Denver continued that tradition. Perhaps for me, one of the most exciting things was the reunion with friends, many of whom I hadn't seen for years, particularly as my last international conferences were probably in 2004 in Madison in Wisconsin, and 2009 when the first IAP2 International Conference was held in the UK in Glasgow. I loved exploring Denver, which I hadn't visited before, despite living in the US for 5 years in the 60s and visiting many times since. You can see on the left of my slide there a big blue bear peering into an office window, and that was one of the magnificent pieces of public art around the city. I really valued the opportunity to be part of the conversations around IAP2's future, especially since I haven't been that involved in the recent past, since I changed the focus of my work a little. The conference sessions were as always, full of wisdom and humour. And as usual, I found it very hard to choose from the smorgasbord of titles that were on offer. But I think my reflections that I'll share with you later in this presentation were some of the ultimate truths around communication, which is the fundamental of community engagement, and done well is the main creator of change. I was interested in Liz talking about Gemma Puddy's self-reflection session, because I also found that revealing. But I think most of all, I enjoyed the vibe of the conference, all the people I reconnected with. I'm sure my memories of my 5 days in Denver will remain with me for a very long time. So let me expand on those things that I took out of my 5 days in Denver. I took this photo at the end of an IAP2 trainers meeting. I've been an IAP2 trainer myself for 10 years before I retired several years ago, and most of those people in that photo are long-standing friends as well as colleagues. I can name them all, and I have a P2 history perhaps with each one of those. But I also made new friends within the IAP2 family, which perhaps I didn't necessarily expect to do. And I caught up with people's stories, both professional and personal, and I shared walks and visits and museums and meals around Denver with friends old and new. So what else? The opportunity to participate in those future thinking sessions that the others have talked about as well. I took this photo in one of the sessions. You can see our facilitator, Stephen, taking a very active role in the discussions. At 6'7", Stephen towered above us all, probably both physically, but also in guiding us through some quite difficult activities and conversations. As the other three have mentioned, we participated in future thinking about where public participation is today and where IAP2 is going as an organisation. We drew on the skills of over 50 people in the room, and we tried to imagine the future for IAP2, including people from the past like me and people for the future like Rachael, Kate and Liz. We worked together to find many positives in the conversations. Some of those conversations were difficult. I'm sorry, I seem to be going in the wrong direction here. There we go. We found positives. We probably healed a few wounds through some honest conversations. And I think what we generally agreed about was that public participation is important in today's world. The internationality of IAP2 is also very important, and the association itself will be better off if we come together and listen to each other, share our wisdom and our practice across all the various borders that have the potential to divide us, and that we listen to all the voices as we come together, which I think we did in Denver. So here are some reflections about some of the sessions that I attended, which are still front of mind for me 5 months later. On the first day, I went to a terrific session run by an author and a communicator called Mary Galinas. And she talked about how we can get out of stuckness when we are in conversations with people, because we allow emotions, particularly fear and anger, to get in the way. Mary talked about self-mastery and ways to design processes to help address those issues that we try and address when we're preparing for our conversations, but also how to be ready in the moment to deal with whatever comes up. Cassie Hemphill had us in her session about listening, assessing our listening styles using an internet tool, and she got us thinking about how we can listen better to those who are putting forward very different ideas from ours and perhaps communicating in different ways. I personally am constantly reminded of the importance of listening. Not just listening, not just hearing, but genuinely listening for what is being said, for what is not being said, and trying to stand just for a while in someone else's shoes, and reflecting on what all of that means in context of whatever situation that we're facing. So I really enjoyed Cassie's session. But in that afternoon, I think actually it was on the morning of the second day, the session that really was outstanding was one run by Alan Beattie from Perth, who is currently exploring how people with few verbal skills can actually learn to communicate their feelings and emotions through drumming. How often do we struggle when people are emotional, but they use that emotion in a negative way rather than being able to explore how they're feeling in a way that other people perhaps can understand non-verbally. You can see us in that picture with a skilled drummer learning how to communicate with these very basic instruments. And I'd say never underestimate the power of non-verbal communication, as Liz discovered herself when she found herself without a voice for some of the conference sessions and had to learn other ways. Another session that I went to was run by an old friend and colleague, John Godek, who reminded us about our own personal biases and how difficult it is sometimes to communicate effectively with people perhaps you don't like, perhaps people you don't agree with, or more difficult of all, people who hold opposing views or philosophies of life to yours. John gave us some sage advice, reminding us that people make decisions and accept or refuse information mostly based on their emotions and their feelings, rather than facts and rationality. Therefore, if we are dealing with those people, then they may be acting out their anger and anxiety and fear, so we need to explore what they are feeling and have conversations about their concerns rather than what we understand the facts to be of that situation. Exploring how people's emotions affect their positions, their interests and their values is usually more helpful than trying to influence them with facts and information. And I think we've heard that from other sessions from the others in this webinar. My world over the past few years, rather than being very much impacted or being involved with the community engagement space, has been focusing on building capability within teams and organisations to be able to collaborate more effectively. And while this narrow focus has to some degree taken me away from my community engagement practice, I was hoping to explore other people's experiences and perspectives about collaborative practice at the conference. So when I actually attended what they call some deep dive sessions around collaboration, I was a little disappointed. The first of those those deep dive sessions took up a lot of time playing quite a complicated game before drawing out from it some useful aspects, which you can see in the bottom bar of some of the things that were written up at the end of it. I didn't get an awful lot from that session, and others perhaps got more than I did. But I did like the idea of deeply diving into one topic during a conference. So I might consider applying that concept in a different way in other learning situations. But I did like Lewis Michelson's session, where he asked the question, is collaboration really possible in a public participation context when people don't like each other, they perhaps don't trust the convener or who's ever standing in the front of the room, or they don't know how to collaborate, which I think is a significant issue. I really enjoyed Lewis because for those of us who have been training the Foundations program, we always used one of Lewis's very useful case studies where he had designed in the past and run a public participation process at the collaborate level on the spectrum. So I knew he would have some good stories to tell, and he did. So I'm going to take us now into the summary of, I think, perhaps what we might all have taken from this webinar. I know that you would have got a lot from the other three presentations, so I'll just run perhaps a quick summary from us all. I think we before experienced the conference and the Denver and the Denver experience itself in different ways, but I think I feel some similarities through what I've heard from today's experiences. I think we all attended the bookend sessions about the future of IAP2, and from those conversations and from hearing what the others said today, I think we all feel positive about the future of IAP2 and the need to keep the association international so we continue to learn from our colleagues around the globe. I personally am so glad there are young people like Liz, Rachel, and Kate and others who were at that conference and who can take the Australasian affiliate forward. I'm one of the old guard, and we're happy to hand the baton over to the new generation. I think the different sessions that we attended gave us all new ideas for practicing public participation. Rachel, I think, focused on sessions about managing polarization and situations where communities are angry, where relationships are toxic, and getting agreement sometimes appears impossible. These are situations I think we all fear, and we can try to avoid them using the ideas and suggestions that Rachel shared with us. Liz lost her voice and learned firsthand about non-verbal communication and shared with us her personal reflections about the session she attended and the impact they had on her practice. So thank you, Liz, for those. Kate reflected on the need to be clear about what we mean when we talk about the common good. And she shared with us a great story about engagement in Hawaii that demonstrates the need to understand good in terms of history, culture and values. I found that I didn't go to that session, and I was pleased to hear about it from Kate. And I found myself reconnecting with the need for effective communication as a basic skill for public participation and engagement. We all love Denver, the city and its situation on the magical Rocky Mountains, and we all had experiences and increased our knowledge about how public participation is being practiced today. And hopefully we're bringing these back to our Australasian affiliate colleagues through this webinar. And in my presentation, I have the word Australian, and of course I mean Australasian, particularly with our New Zealand friends across the Tasman. So I hope this webinar has been useful to everyone. I think we have brought a lot back with us, and I hope by sharing it with you, it will allow you to share some of those experiences with us. So thank you all, and thank you my colleagues, thank you the Australasian chapter, and thank you to all the people that I met in Denver and with whom I had such a good time. So thanks.